All right, so I taught this class last 2 years ago, and since then, just going through these handouts, I've been making some updates that we'll talk about as we go through. Some of it's just a little formatting thing that can drive you crazy, but the big thing was trying to update the list of plans, which we'll probably end up going over next week. We might touch on today. The plan today is to take a look at this entire handout and just go through the whole thing at a fairly fast pace to sort of get ourselves caught up to what we've done. So we brought the animals in here, which is a lot of fun, but then sometimes there's the list of nouns that we're also trying to learn as well, so we want to make sure those don't fall off the table. Any questions before we get started? The TV is loud. Remote. Okay, let me just open this thing, and then we'll get started. All right, so and who's on the phone? Okay. So we got some new handouts. I'm sorry? Cookta.
Cookta.
Uh-huh.
Hi, Auntie. Hi.
Okay. And cheese.
Okay, it's up on the phone.
Okay. And cheese. So I went through and I made a bunch of updates to this. If you go to tlingit.info under resources, the beginning Tlingit workbook is there. There's also a tab for learning Tlingit, and under beginning Tlingit, it's also there. What you guys have in the class should look exactly like what's up here. There might be a couple of font changes and other things like that. Which brings me to typing in Tlingit. It's a really interesting process. It's changed a lot over the years. So we see some of the older documents, and what they had was they would work on a typewriter, and then someone would come through with a pen later and put all the underlines in and all the tone marks in, and then they would photocopy that and then make those cone-bound books. So that's going back, pretty far. That was the way to do that. And then as computers get introduced, there's different methods from, and the main method used was using an underline. The problems that this presented was if you sent text back and forth, copied and pasted, you might lose the formatting, and that makes a big deal, whether it's an underline K or not. And then the other problem is the swoop of the G and getting an underline to go underneath that. So looking and thinking about like the history of writing Tlingit has changed quite a bit in recent years. So as more and more programs become available, if you have a Mac, there's a keyboard that you could download. I got to redo the instructions for it, but I'll work on that. And it works for typing in Haida as well. Getting underlined characters on there. I'm not sure about all the characters that are used in Shmelgeb, but I'm sure it would help with that as well if you're using any underlined characters. It works pretty well. The other thing is a program called Popcar, and that's C-H-A-R. I'm not sure what it looks like on a PC, but if you're using a Mac, in the top left, you get this little tiny letter P there, and when you click on it, I don't know if it's going to work because I'm full screen. Let me get out of full screen. So here. So what happens is this window pops up, and you can select these special characters from here. And then it kind of remembers where you last were. And Crippen has been using what's called the combining macron below. And I don't know enough about fonts and things like that to say what's best. But the background seems to work well. Certain fonts and certain programs will reject it. But things that use Unicode, like Facebook or texting on your phone, they don't seem to have problems with it. The areas that do, is some older versions like Microsoft Word and certain fonts, but the newer versions seem to be getting better with dealing with it. And then I've been using this combining low line simply because sometimes in certain fonts, the underline looks pretty, it's shorter than the letter. So some of it's just getting into these little sort of really fine details. But the nice thing with using these is you can copy and paste the text. And while you have some errors sometimes with the text, sometimes, you know, as long as you don't have any of these font errors, you're going to get the underline. You'll keep the underline. Okay, so back to this. So we're going to go through this workbook. We'll do each of the nouns and the different words twice, and then we'll move. So it's kind of a quick run through to get us caught up to where we were. Feel free to ask any questions while we go. Today is just sort of a review, get caught up there, and start moving into this next chapter. Okay. So we have some introductory content, and we'll get started on page 2. So when we talk about vowels, it's going to matter. It matters now, but it's going to make sense why we tend to sort of focus on making sure we keep in mind long vowels and short vowels are linked. Sometimes high tones and low tones are linked. Sometimes they'll move back and forth, and they'll do so in really regular ways. But we won't focus. We'll get tone from the other letters. So now we'll just work on this set of vowels right here, moving between short and long. And remember, there's a sound in English that is not in Tlingit. Bat, cat, rat, sat, hat. That A sound is not in Tlingit. It's more of a type of sound. So it's not an A sound. Cat, cat, cat. So the thing to keep in mind is A to 2 A's make sense. E to EI may not make sense to the I as far as we're familiar with reading and writing. I to the double E, U to the double O. So it's more about the sounds than the actual writing system, but just keep that in mind. So then with these sonor endings, what happens is there's basically two things. They're kind of opposites. The W is rounding, which means your lips are pursing out. You're making a kissy face or a fish face. The Y at the end means going back, like you're smiling or you're grimacing. Okay. Ow. 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 I. Ew. 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 E. 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 Ooh. 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 Okay, so moving on to the next page. We're going to run through this. So this sound chart, again, it starts in the front of the mouth and moves to the back of the throat. English is all in the front of the mouth. I think it is primarily in the back of the throat. Okay. Wasus,
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 masus,
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 cheech,
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 eat,
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 da,
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 glade,
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 zait,
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 jen,
Jen,
jen.
Jen,
Let's check my microphone real quick. Okay, we're good. Floosh,
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 oog,
Ook,
oog,
Ook,
noosk,
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 seek,
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 speak,
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 shaw,
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 tia,
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 up,
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 clay shoe,
Clay Flew,
clay shoe,
Clay Flew,
eve,
Eek,
eve,
Eek,
saw,
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 tsatsi,
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 yak,
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 gooch,
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 cost,
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 inchei,
Kinchei,
inchei,
Kinchei,
khasha,
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 khag,
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 washa,
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 on quayi,
Anquai,
on quayi,
Anquai,
yak,
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 quat,
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 zisk,
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 quasta,
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 gauch,
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 quat,
Quan,
quat,
Quan,
zich,
Sieg,
zich,
Sieg,
water break, you need? Ooch,
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 cuck, cuck, cuck,
Cuck,
a tape,
A tape,
a tape,
A tape,
chad,
Hot,
chad,
Hot,
on,
On, On,
wena,
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 aquan,
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 knock,
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 quack, 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 slap,
Slab,
slap,
Slab,
shan, Hawaii,
Shanachwai,
Shanahwai,
Shanachwai,
Hut,
Duhan,
Duhun,
Duhan,
Quad,
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 Nech,
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 Yana A,
Yana A,
Yana A,
Yana A,
Hit,
Hit,
Hit.
Hit,
Are you okay? So we move into the second chapter. So this whole handout is based entirely on beginning Tlingit. It has a couple of sort of some supplementary things. The sound chart is a little bit new. We've been talking, those of us who teach Tlingit, about how to introduce these sounds for years. The idea with this chart came from a lot of discussions, a lot of different teachers and researchers, and we decided to have like placement of the mouth as the most important thing. It's been an interesting thing. Like some people have been doing it alphabetical, but here it's just about where it's located in the mouth, because you get further back, it tends to get a little trickier. Although the pinched L and the pinched TL can sometimes some problems. So then we get into our first question and answer drill, and these question and answer drills are really learning these certain patterns and then where you can fill in the blanks. And then we talk in class about how we can use these to stay in the language, and then the phrases that we've been going over also to help us stay in the language. Here we go. So we start off with a few more. So the first one was really just the focus is on sounds. It's good to look at those images. But now we shift into just learning the names of these things. So the goal of this chapter is really to learn the names of these things that you see. And it's trying to use a lot of images so that we're thinking of that particular object. And when you see it in the world, you can just call it that. Atdaye,
Atdaye.
atdaye,
Atdaye.
tas,
Tas.
tas,
Tas.
shawat,
Shawat.
shawat,
Shawat.
ah,
Ah.
ichte,
Ichte.
ichte,
Ichte.
te,
Te.
te,
Te.
say,
Say.
say,
Say.
shake it,
Shake it.
shake it,
Shake it.
tikitkiya,
Tikitkiya.
tikitkiya,
Tikitkiya.
hit,
Hit.
hit,
Hit.
ayauditi,
Ayauditi.
ayauditi,
Ayauditi.
keys,
Keys.
keys,
Keys.
nukshiyan,
Nukshiyan.
nukshiyan,
Nukshiyan.
shukshiyan,
Shukshiyan.
shukshiyan,
Shukshiyan.
gut,
Gut.
gut,
Gut.
wushyaye,
Wushyaye.
wushyaye,
Wushyaye.
una,
Una.
una,
Una.
yai,
Yai.
yai,
Yai.
yao,
Yao.
yao,
Yao.
e,
E.
oops, e,
E.
e,
E.
seal,
Seal.
seal,
Seal.
new,
New.
new,
New.
yana a,
Yana A.
yana a,
Yana A.
yak,
Yak.
yak,
Yak.
name,
Name.
name,
Name.
cheech,
Cheech.
cheech,
Cheech.
da,
Da.
da,
Da.
gow,
Gow.
gow,
Gow.
heen,
Beam.
heen,
Beam.
jen,
Jen.
jen,
Jen.
cocaine,
Cocaine.
cocaine,
Cocaine.
nusk,
Nusk.
nusk,
Nusk.
sock,
Sock.
sock,
Sock.
shaw,
Shaw.
shaw,
Shaw.
tia,
Tia.
tia,
Tia.
wasus,
Wasus.
wasus,
Wasus.
yak,
Yak.
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 So this is our first, it's a big set of nouns. We should be able to get those, with about 80% accuracy, I would hope, maybe somewhere between 90 and 100 would be even better. And so what you can do outside of this class is really just practice those nouns and really just get to know them. So when you see that image, you're able to recall it. I know you've got a list of nouns and verbs that you are committed to memorizing. We'll start going over those more on Monday. We'll talk about your first language performance, which is coming up. But now we're going to start moving into how to form basic questions in Tlingit. So we get to this particle, sa, and it's a body part really at the base of the neck. I looked it up, what it's called. There's like some medical term for it. No, I forget. But it's really right at just above the top of your chest bone, whatever that thing is called. Yeah, right above your sternum. So it's called something, there's a couple of different names. Jugular indentation. Anyways, it's right where sort of your neck starts and where your vocal cords are really, they're kind of near that area. And sate is related to that. Sa, you'll see it in a bunch of different verb forms. Not a bunch, just get a few. And you'll see things like bib, saka, the thing on the sa, sadat, eye, a scarf, the thing around the sa that keeps it warm. And then there's this thing called the focus part. So, on its own, you're just sort of calling attention to something, and it tends to combine with a few different other particles. So then we're going over this sense of Tlingit space. There are 3 senses of space. There's like relation to the speaker and sort of the immediate audience. And then there's also 2 objects in relation to each other. Then there's everything in relation to where the ocean meets the shore. So the first set, we start with close to us, and then we get farther away. Yeah.
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 He.
Hair.
He.
Hair.
We.
Where.
We.
Where.
You.
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 And then we have a question and answer drill. I'll just grab some of the nouns that we've gone over just recently, just as generic answers. Ya saya,
Saya.
wasus awe,
Wasus away.
da sawe,
Dasaway.
ya ayah.
Ya.
So we're learning these, what's the right response? And the response really depends on where the object is. You're saying what it is, and you're also talking about where it's located.
You have the high tone over the Y and the emphasis on ya.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, it's right there too. Thank you. Okay, good. Mental note. Okay. Sheesh. Yeah, if you ever spot anything, just let me know, because forever to fix this. Okay, so this is another question and answer drill. So goose, and then a noun after it. And you're asking where it is. So the first questions were what questions. This one is a where question. So you could say goose e, ya e, hey dudes e, way dudes e, you dudes e. So this is, but it's really, the ya and the way to are usually in responses to where is something. Right? Get, get. So this is another way to form a question. This turns things into yes or no questions. So it's usually, there's certain placements you want to put it in certain phrases. This changes the phrase. But usually it goes by whatever thing you're really trying to question. Take. And again, there's multiple ways to say yes. The tone there could be a tone in there, it could be in different locations. Hinakya.
Hinakya.
Like. Kahwe awe.
Like. Kakwe awe.
Hinakwe.
Hinakwe.
Hinaya.
Hinaya.
So again, a question and answer drill. Is it this? Is it that? Okay. Seek.
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 Sorry. It's okay. Lost the rhythm. Seek.
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 Dana.
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 Kawoot.
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 This.
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 Keshish.
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 On.
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 Niche.
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 Geesh.
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 Gun.
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 Cost.
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 Shayate.
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 Keat.
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 Ton.
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 Yain.
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 Gooch.
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 Nadak.
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 Kushta.
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 Douche.
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 Kutia.
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 Canaced.
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 Kahak.
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 Shakiat.
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 Naat.
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 Jaji.
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 Cajun.
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 Shao.
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 Shayena.
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 Taway.
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 Tina.
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 Yukaut.
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 Hayukauti.
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 Are you okay? Okay, so we're just going to substitute some things in here, but forming forming questions in Tlingit. And usually there'll be a bunch of stuff after. Sometimes it's just a simple, someone might say, I went to Yakta. Yaktate kuhwatin. You might say kuhwatkin sa. When, right? So it's just that's the simplest form of a question with the particle, the two particles together, the ones on the left and then the sa. Da saya.
Da saya.
Da asa.
Da asa.
Wasawe.
Wasawe.
Adu saya.
Adu saya.
Guksa.
Guksa.
Kunsawe.
Kunsawe.
Kwetkinsa.
Kwetkinsa.
Kwetkasaya.
Kwetkasaya.
Dot yisawe.
Dat yisawe.
Dot asa.
Dat basa.
Wanaksawe.
Wanaksawe.
Good. So that gets us to the next chapter. So going through these, the things that we've done. So we got another set of nouns, and we're going to get to another set of questions, and we're going to also get to pronouns in this chapter. And today we're going to do all 4 sets of pronouns. There is a 5th set in Tlingit, and there's quite a few other, we're doing these groups of 3s. The next sort of thing we do after that is we pluralize those 3. So we go from me, you, him or her, to us, y'all, them. and sort of, and then there's a whole set of 3 for each of those. Any questions? Zayt,
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 sa,
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 Anquai,
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 Eat,
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 Inchai,
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 Eat,
Ski,
eat,
Eat,
ah, ah, Tatsi,
Tatski,
tatsi.
Tatski,
We're talking about birds for just a quick second. Not everyone is in agreement, but there seems to be this older way of sort of categorizing birds, maybe, so that tatsi would be any bird that gets down to about the size of your hand. If it gets smaller than that, then it's tzit, and it's a contraction of this word with a diminutive, what we call a diminutive suffix, making something small at the end. Tzit, tatsi. But if the bird is something that has some sort of special purpose, everything's special, what's that thing? You're unique, like a snowflake, like everybody else. But if Tlingit people didn't eat it, or if it didn't sort of tell us something or do something, specific, and especially like real little birds, sometimes they're just called tsatsi. They're all tsatsi. And so it might not have an individual name if it gets small enough and it doesn't serve some specific cultural purpose usually. And then other ones sometimes they'll have something tsatsi. There's a whole bunch of them that do have names, all these different types of ducks and everything. It's really neat to sort of study the birds in Tlingit. There's a paper by Tom Thornton. I want to find it and put it on Tlingit.info that talks about studying bird names.
What's the name for chickadee again?
Tuwu. Well, what we had yesterday was not a chickadee. We debunked the myth, so he was an imposter. Yes, and chickadee has a black head, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know birds have hops. Somebody told me in the evening class. I don't know what that little one is. Quite. This. Hoots. Khwasta. So now we get into our sets of pronouns, and these are the 4 that we're really going to do a lot of stuff with. The first one, we learn them, but they're not used a whole lot. We've heard the phrase, akwe. Like that's a way you could greet someone. It's kind of being silly. It's like saying, is that you? Right? But you might greet someone like that and be like, I talk with elders quite a bit, and some of them, they can't really see, and they'll say, well, they're not being silly, they can't really see. And there's certain uses for them, but they're not used nearly as often as the others. So we go 1, 2, 3, first person, second person, third person, talking about myself, talking about you, talking about this other person. Right? Khat wa'eh hu. Khat wa'eh hu. Ach ik du. Ach ik du. Cha ik. Cha ik. So we're getting to the 0 pronoun, and so we just sort of keep in mind that there's something there even though we don't say anything. And we're going to see this in quite a few other places. Khat eh. Khat eh. When we get to these pronouns as well, the independent pronouns all have a high tone in them somewhere. That includes the plural ones, all of them. The other ones don't have any tone. So as far as when you're reading Tlingit, or if you're listening to Tlingit and you get better at spotting tone, if you don't hear a tone, a high tone in it, then you know it's one of these other types of pronouns. Okay, so using these, and then we learn another particle, which is and. And we do another question and answer drill. And so again, there's no verb in this. We haven't dealt with any verbs, even though we just looked at object and subject pronouns means we're using verbs. And we haven't used any yet not in these lessons. Dasa ijiwu.
Dasa ijiwu.
Dasa ijiwu.
Dasa ijiwu.
Ziskahut achjiwu.
Ziskahut achjiwu.
Dasa achjiwu.
Dasa achjiwu.
Dasa achjiwu.
Dasa achjiwu.
Kutiya ha kasha ijiwu.
Kutiya kasha ijiwu.
So when we're listening for the and the so we're just keeping track of how these pronouns work. Dasa dujiwu.
Dasa dujiwu.
Tawe ha janwu dujiwu.
Tawe ha janwu dujiwu.
And then we can do the same thing. So we were learning how to do these what questions, and then these yes or no questions, right? With all of these different patterns. So I could say, Janmu ge ejiwu. Kaik tawe achjiwu. So the second one, and now this next one we're going to learn. So we could say the noun here. So we could say. Adusagau dujiwu.
Adusagau dujiwu.
Gau dujiwu. Yatutin.
Gau dujiwu. Yatutin.
Object dujiwu. Name. Right. So that's the order it would go. So we all had different objects in this room, and I could say Adusa. And then blank dujiwu. You would look around and see who has it. So I don't think we did that page yet. And then we get our first verb. So the way we sort of handled this verb was we threw an object in the center of the room. Like it was a. And I did this one a little bit wrong. Shame on me. So in the middle of the room is a watsik. Sitting on the table next to us all is a tawe. Sitting way over in the corner is yai. Okay? Nice. So the way that this conversation works is we're talking to Watsik. So now what we've done to sort of keep this sort of simple, we've done these sort of triangle things. But now we introduce a fourth person. So now we're talking to Watsik about seeing the ya. But in this conversation, I'm going to see it, you're going to see it, he or she is going to see it. So what's happening here is we have one object over there, which is ya, but the subject is going to change from me to you, to him or her. And the way that this is going to change is going to reveal something about these pronouns. Because when we did the object pronouns, we did khat, blank, but there are situations where we would say khat, where the zero becomes an a. The situation where the zero becomes an a is when you have a third person and a third person. Because as we sort of unpack the grammar of Tlingit, we see what's going on is when we say, Yai Chatin,
Yai Chatin.
Yai Chatin, So if we think about yai and we just ignore it because it's not, it specifies something, but it's not really part of the verb. You don't need it for the verb. And we think about the way pronouns work in English. So what I would say, I could say he sees him, she sees her, she sees him, or any combination of these pronouns. But if those pronouns move to a specific type of noun, name, or what type of thing it is, kinship term, whatever, then the pronoun will go away. So I'd say, she sees her. But in English, I could also say, mountain sheep sees way. The mountain sheep sees the way. I don't know why. So the pronoun goes away. If we were to use English and speak with Tlingit grammar, we would say, the mountain sheep, he sees him, the whale, or her. So the pronoun does not go away, and the pronoun also does not separate from the verb. Right? The pronoun, the verb is like, the verb is like mama bear, and the cub is like baby bear. Right? Anything comes in between it, she just destroys it. Now there are certain things that would pop up in between the object and the verb, but they're all still built into the verb. So it doesn't necessarily leave the verb. So these are important concepts because we're going to see. So if we're talking to Watsik, and what we're saying is, I see Yai. They're going to say, you see Yai. He or she sees Yai. So that's the conversation. The first one. Yai chatin.
Yai chatin.
Yai chatin.
Yai chatin.
Yai iyatin.
Yai iyatin.
Yai iyatin.
Yai iyatin.
Yai ayatin.
Yai ayatin.
Yai ayatin.
Yai ayatin.
So if we think of these things, what we've got in these sentences, we've got an object, subject, classifier, and a verb. Classifier is just part of the verb. We'll learn more about it later. But what's happening here is we've got 0, cha, ya, teen, which means chatin. Add them up together, and that's what you get. The second one, 0, it, ya, teen, because we go object, subject, verb. So then we get iyatin. We switch it over here, we have a. We have 0, ya, teen. So the third person subject will always be 0. The object will be 0 unless the subject is also 0. Okay. Everyone okay? Dasa iyatin.
Dasa iyatin.
Okay, everybody say Dasa iyatin.
Dasa iyatin.
Watsik chatin.
Watsik chatin.
Watsik iyatin.
Watsik iyatin.
Watsik chatin.
Watsik chatin.
Okay. So now we get into the names. And one thing I do want to talk about for a second, something that happened over the last 10, 20 years. And it's not a bad thing, but it's something that we could probably adjust. What has happened is being able to introduce yourself in Tlingit has become sort of a badge of being a Tlingit speaker. And so I've seen it where they'll have people stand up and introduce themselves to show that they're learning their language. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to be able to do this because one of the things in Tlingit is concepts of identity are really important. But that identity is usually, I learn who I am by learning who I'm related to. That's one of the most important things. So you understand clan relationships, and when you get to meet somebody, you're very cautious until you figure out what their clan is and what relationship is going to be as far as the friendship goes. But the other thing that's we try to avoid talking about ourselves in public, right? So traditionally in Tlingit, there would really be no reason to stand up in front of people and introduce yourself. And I understand because Tlingit, it's hard to put things together. It's hard to just sort of make conversation and speeches and things like that. But we can learn how to do that. We actually have so many phrases in that phrase book, we can piece something together, even if we're reading it off of a piece of paper. When we start learning how to sort of conjugate things a little bit, then we can start to get even better. Now, I can see standing up and introducing somebody else, especially if they're your clan opposite, or a sibling or something, you want to talk about that. But even that is getting into gray territory. When I say you shouldn't stand up and talk about yourself in front of people, that also means you shouldn't stand up and necessarily talk about your own clan in front of people. There might be situations where you're telling your clan history so that it's recorded and people know it. But you want to be careful, like say if your clan X, we'll just call you guys Adi, right? So if your clan hosted something and you were very proud of how it went, you were very happy, and you stood up and you said, I'm so proud of how we did during this thing. That's actually it's kind of bad form. The other clan should be the opposite clan should be the one standing up and saying. And so as we start examining clan structure and things like that, there's all kinds of areas where we need to be kind of delicate. And we'll talk about that more next week as we get into, we're going to take a look at most of the known clans. I think we might have them all down here, I'm not sure. This is a continually evolving list of clans. Lots of different people have had their hands in this document. And it's been a really fun project to try and think of how these clans are related. And what it comes down to is these massive migrations, clans branching off into other clans. Different groups of people, sometimes maybe Tsimshian people, sometimes Iang people, maybe Atna people, Haida people, coming in and just becoming Tlingit over time. And I think it's so interesting to me that that's the way things happen, because now identity politics are really different, right? Are you Tlingit enough? You know, and there's all these different kind of weird things. Whereas if you're speaking Tlingit, you understand that Tlingit means human being. It means human being, right? Tawe, Watsik, Yai, Tlingit. That's just how it works. But now we've got blood quantum, we've got these other things that get us thinking more in a really curious way about how identity functions in language. But for me, if you're here, you're doing stuff with the language, you're in the less than 1% that's committed to doing it. So it's crazy to me. If we have a class here and there's Kadushu, Dachadushu, Askadushu, Jinkatu. We got 11 people, about 11 people combined on here. 12. No, we got about 12 people here altogether. That's almost 10% of the entire Tlingit-speaking world, right? It just blows me away. So if you look at all the Tlingit people in the world, all the people who were by blood Tlingits, fewer than 1% of them could do anything with their own language. If you took all of Tlingit country, fewer than 1% of those people could do anything with this language. So for me, it's all about who's doing something with the language. That's more important to me than genealogy charts and other things like that. Although there's a lot to be said about tracking this stuff, clans, knowing what the history is, and if you come into this type of exercise, I gotta turn the screen sharing on. And so we talk about this stuff a lot because identity comes into play at this particular chapter, right? We talk about parents, grandparents, things like that. And this is sometimes can become what we call sensitive, right? Because sometimes we're talking about these clans and where they come from, and that could make people upset. I understand that. I think we're in a different mode right now because so few people have a grasp on this knowledge. It used to be that people knew this stuff everywhere, all over the place. People just knew this, but now there's all these crevices in our knowledge systems. So it's important to look at things. The other thing is sometimes things come to the surface. My parents are the same moiety, or the same clan. Some of those things come to the surface here. People make fun of me because I'm this clan. I get upset because my parent knew so much and was this cultural leader but never taught me anything. So these are the types of things I hear when we get to this section. When we talk about, but if you don't have a clan per se, then we use lineage. We use what your cultural lineage is in this particular section. So to close it up, there's this phrase, Yehatu wasak. We say Yehatu wasak.
Yehatu wasak.
Yehatu wasak.
Yehatu wasak.
That's what my name is. So we use names in this class. We're not using our English names. So let's just, last thing we'll do is go around the room and try and catch everybody to what your name is, followed by Yehatu wasak. Kone Yehatu wasak.
Yitak Horsby Yechet Wasak.
Yet to teen Yechet Duasak.
Sumek Yechet Wasak.
Tutmagoga ye hatusak.
Ye desatin ye chatusak.
Uski Yehatu wasak.
Okay. And let's just go Naweya.
Me? Wait, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Nawea Yehatu wasak.
Okay. Yet Uchta.
Yes, Yeshatusak. Yeshatusak.
Okay. And to the boardroom.
How do you say me again?
Kukja.
What's the do a sock?
Kukja. Yehatu wasak. Kukja. Yehat.
Do a sock.
Okay.
Yehatu wasak. Alfie, Yehatu wasak.
Okay. That's Sheesh. And to yes. Okay. Jasmine, are you?
Gauge Yehatusak.
Sheesh. And then on the phone, Tonke.
Okay, yeah, do a sock.
Okay. Is that everybody? All right. Sheesh, you guys have an awesome weekend. Study a whole bunch of Tlingits all weekend. Spent hours on the counting portion of that handout. It was very fun. I'm not happy with the closed hands thing. I did all I can. Sheesh, Chaya.
Kune.
Gaza?
I have a question.
Okay.
So I was curious because my mom is adopted, Gahya Kagwantan. So I was looking at the handout last night and was wondering about like the Dutch on. And which grandparents that would be.
So for Dutch Hun, it would be either. It could be your mother's, generally not your mother's mother, because you matrilineal, that's just what you are. It would be your mother's father, or your father's father, or your father's mother. You're the Dutch Hun of all of those.
Okay.
Your Dakanuku is your mother's father's parent.
Brother?
That's the only one that's really specific. The other one, Dachkan could be anything that you're related to that's farther than your parents.
Okay. Because I was wondering how to acknowledge like my Mohawk side.
Yeah, so Mohawk Dachkan,
Okay.
goes back that far.
Kind of like 100 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
You can't.
And I was
All right.
trying to get
Good job.
citizen rights